The British people have voted to leave the European Union. And let me congratulate all those who took part in the Leave campaign for the spirited and passionate case that they made. It was not a decision that was taken lightly, so there can be no doubt about the result. I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a success of it. We need a strong, new, positive vision for the future of our country. A vision of a country that works not for the privileged few, but that works for every one of us.
In Iraq, 2 bombs have exploded in a busy market in central Baghdad, killing at least 27 people and wounding 50. The explosions occurred in Al Sinak early on Saturday during the morning rush. The Interior Ministry confirmed that a roadside bomb exploded, and as crowds gathered, a suicide bomber detonated his device. No group has claimed responsibility for the blasts, but the Islamic State group has launched near-daily attacks in the capital in recent months.
At least 28 people have been killed in 2 bomb explosions that rocked the center of Iraq's capital, Baghdad. The bombings occurred minutes apart in Baghdad's Sinak neighborhood. Over 50 people were also injured in the attack. Daesh terrorists have claimed responsibility for the attack. Tunisia says it has jailed or is closely monitoring some 800 militants who have returned from foreign battlefields since 2007. The government spokesperson says nearly 3,000 Tunisians are fighting alongside militant groups in Libya, Syria and Iraq. The United Nations puts the figure at 5,000. Bahraini security forces cracked down on anti-regime protesters ahead of the first anniversary of Saudi Arabia's execution of prominent Shia cleric Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr. They used tear gas against demonstrators who chanted anti-regime slogans in the villages of Sitra and Abu Saiba. A record number of Israeli settlers have stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem, Al-Quds, in 2016. Palestinian sources say nearly 15,000 settlers entered the holy Islamic site by force. Palestinians consider the settlers' frequent visits to the mosque as provocative and blame this for clashes with Israeli forces. U.S. Republican lawmakers are planning to introduce a bill to condemn the UN Security Council for last week's resolution against Israeli settlements. The measure could be launched when Congress is reconvened next week. Sources say Republicans in both chambers are moving quickly to denounce the resolution. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has defended her refugee policy, saying this is reflected in Germany's rule of law and values. She called on EU member states to focus on common interests beyond national benefits. The German Chancellor is facing criticism for allowing in large numbers of refugees in 2015.
A monitoring group says that fresh clashes have erupted between foreign-backed militants and Syrian government forces near Damascus, despite a nationwide ceasefire. According to the so-called Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the fighting is taking place in a militant-held area which provides most of the capital's water supplies. The UK-based opposition source said it is not clear who started the clashes. It had earlier reported fighting near the town of Maharda in Hama province. However, the group said the ceasefire was largely holding. The deal brokered by Turkey and Russia went into effect at Thursday midnight local time. It does not include terrorist groups such as Daesh and the Nusra Front. Press TV's Mohammed Ali joins us now from the Syrian capital, Damascus. Mohammed, the ceasefire is largely holding, but reports are indicating of fighting resuming in some areas. Update us on the situation and whether the resumption of fighting endangers the ceasefire in its entirety or not.
As U.S. President Barack Obama prepares to leave the White House, many are trying to point to Cuba as one of his major policy successes. That's a view almost totally absent in Cuba, where people routinely describe Obama's legacy as one of deceptions. Obama's only serious policy change has been the reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Havana, but relations remain far from normalized. What Obama has not done is to end the devastating blockade, which has been the primary obstacle to the development and well-being of Cuba since 1962.
It's possible that many Cubans see Obama's legacy as half-empty, just as many do in the U.S. and around the world. He failed to dismantle the blockade or end long-running programs to topple Cuba's government.
Not only has Obama repeatedly renewed the unilateral U.S. embargo, which Cubans call an act of genocide, he has even strengthened it. Since 2014, he has approved dozens of fines totaling billions of dollars on companies around the world for trying to trade with Cuba. That has prevented companies from investing and increased the stranglehold on Cuba's economy. Obama's defenders will say that only the U.S. Congress can totally lift the blockade. But Cubans repeatedly cite a number of executive powers Obama has refused to employ, which could have drastically weakened the siege. They say he could have normalized financial relations, authorized more Cuban imports and U.S. exports, permitted U.S. investment, and many others.
Some believe Obama could have accomplished much more. His strategy was to take small steps on issues, like the embargo, only if the Cuban government would back down on issues, which Cuba refused to give up the right to national sovereignty.
Many in the United States have voiced their own disappointment with Obama's failure to close the Guantanamo Bay naval base. The U.S. has occupied the area since 1903 and has been an infamous torture center since 2002. Ramin Mazaheri, Press TV, Havana.
The prosecution calls Alexa to the stand. Amazon's high-tech personal assistant Echo device could take center stage in a murder investigation. Authorities investigating the death of an Arkansas man are attempting to expand the probe to include the device and data possibly saved as evidence. According to court documents, James Andrew Bates had some friends over to watch a football game. In the morning, one of the friends, Victor Collins, was found dead in a hot tub in the backyard. As police were investigating the crime, an Echo device was found at the scene. The device is a cylinder-shaped speaker with internet-connected microphones. Powered by the voice recognition program Alexa, it listens for a user's voice, responding to commands in a female voice, answering inquiries, playing music, or add an upcoming event to a calendar. Prosecutors have requested the court to force Amazon to provide data from the Echo that could reveal more clues about the night of November 22, 2015, when Collins was apparently strangled and drowned. Authorities are now focused on determining if the virtual assistant recorded any relevant information. The search warrant requests all audio recordings, transcribed records, text records, and other data from Bates' Echo speaker. Amazon has not commented on the case, but issued this statement. Amazon will not release customer information without a valid and binding legal demand properly served on us. Amazon objects to overboard and otherwise inappropriate demands as a matter of course. According to the investigator's signed affidavit, there were signs of a struggle at the home. The suspected murderer sustained injuries in the course of the fateful evening. When police arrived to the scene, a broken shot glass and dried blood were discovered inside the home. Bates' attorney claims it's not a murder at all, it's an accident. A discovery hearing in the case is scheduled for March. For FoxNews.com, I'm Rob Demetrius.
A highly pathogenic strain of bird flu has been discovered in 2 dead cats, marking the first case of the virus found in mammals in almost 2 years. Citing information from health authorities, an official from the Gyeonggi-do provincial government said the H5N6 strain, which has infected chickens across the country, was found in the bodies of the cats in Pocheon. The cats were found dead this week nearby a chicken farm where the strain was first reported in November. Health authorities say they are looking to verify whether they were infected with a more highly pathogenic strain of bird flu. And officials said that even if it is the same N6 strain in the cats, there is very little chance the virus could jump from cats to humans, although the authorities are preparing for any possible outcome. This season's bird flu outbreak has led to more than 20 million chickens and ducks nationwide being culled since mid-November.
parts of northern New England just experienced the largest snowstorm in more than 2 years. Heavy snows caused by the nor'easter reached parts of New York, Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire, blanketing regions with nearly 2 feet of snow in some areas. Drivers were left stranded and cars were careening off highways. More than 80 wrecks were reported with emergency crews working into the night. In Maine, more than 40,000 people were without power.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has praised Russian President Vladimir Putin for refraining from tit-for-tat expulsions of American diplomats in response to the U.S.'s punitive measures over the alleged Russian interference in the U.S.'s November election. On Twitter Friday, Trump said that Putin made a great move, and the Russian embassy in Washington quickly retweeted his post. Earlier on Friday, Putin said that Russia would not expel any Americans, despite his foreign ministry asking him to deport 35 U.S. diplomats. The same number of Russian diplomats believed to be connected to the hacking had been expelled from U.S. soil.
Well, I personally, I'm no fan of Vladimir Putin. I think he looks in the mirror and he aspires to be Vladimir the Great. He'd love to put the USSR back together again. The situation that we face, the reality with Russia, happens to be very complex. Right now we're talking cybersecurity, cyber attacks, but I just got back from Afghanistan yesterday. In that region, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, Turkey, it's a challenging map, the entire world right now with those challenges. So isolated to what's gone on over the course of the last couple days, I do believe Putin is outsmarting President Obama with his response. He has been allowed to take the high road, be magnanimous. It's unfortunate. Now we need to move forward.
Is it really taking the high road if you're the one who's first accused of starting this whole thing by hacking into our election system?
Oh, this is just a very, it's like a complicated inside baseball game that Putin, with his messaging, using Twitter, communicating with the rest of the world. I mean, you look at the realignment right now in the Middle East, where Syria there's a truce being negotiated with Russia and Turkey, and the United States isn't even involved. So I think it's more of a messaging outsmarting over the course of the last couple days. But it's impossible to defend the guy, though.
Extra security measures are being carried out on New Year's Eve festivities in European and U.S. cities this year, as they are expecting to gather large crowds. In Berlin, more than double the number of additional officers will be deployed than last year's New Year's Eve. In Paris, 1,700 police officers will be deployed at 24 checkpoints around the city, conducting bag and coat checks. In London, armed officers will regularly patrol the London Underground system, extending the patrol through Sunday, just like last year's New Year's Eve. In New York's Times Square, New York Police Commissioner James O'Neill said they will go for a strategic approach to have 65 sand trucks around the perimeter. According to police on Thursday, while there haven't been any threats against New York City ahead of New Year's Eve celebrations in Times Square, security will still be in full force. 65 sand trucks and 100 blocker vehicles are among the assets the NYPD will use to prevent vehicles from entering Times Square Saturday night. Carlos Gomez, NYPD chief, said that recent world events were taken into account when the security plan was developed, calling the celebration one of the city's largest and most well-protected events. As many as 7,000 police officers will be patrolling Times Square and other events throughout the city this New Year's Eve.
Marching bands from around the country are going to Washington for Donald Trump's inaugural festivities. 40 organizations will be in the parade, 8,000 participants. But tonight, a new controversy surrounding those performers. Jan Chamberlain, a 4-year member of Utah's Mormon Tabernacle Choir, a state Trump won handily, has written a lengthy public Facebook posting that she is quitting the choir because it agreed to sing for the president-elect. It is with a sad and heavy heart that I submit my resignation to you and to choir. I simply cannot continue with the recent turn of events. I could never look at myself in the mirror again with self-respect. I also know, looking from the outside in, it will appear that choir is endorsing tyranny and fascism by singing for this man. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir says the performance is voluntary, and the choir's participation continues its long tradition of performing for U.S. presidents of both parties at inaugurations and in other settings. Late Friday, Chamberlain responded to criticism.
And I value that in our country we have
the freedom of speech under the First Amendment. For me, this is not a political issue. For me, this is a moral issue where I'm concerned about our freedoms being in danger.
Let Christmas shine. This coming just days after it was announced the legendary New York City Rockettes would be performing at the inauguration. In an interview with MarieClaire.com, one Rockette spoke out about the decision. The majority of us said no immediately. Then there's the percentage that said yes, for whatever reason. The Dancers Union ultimately deciding that participation in the inauguration will be voluntary. Madison Square Garden, which employs the dancers, adding, "We had more Rockettes request to participate than we have slots available."
It's not about the big names. It's about the American people. And that's who will be represented all over this inaugural. And that we've gotten such an outpouring of support, of positivity from all over this country. It's been truly humbling.
Multiple countries continue to sponsor the various warring factions in Syria in 2016. Government forces were augmented by Russian airstrikes and Shia militias, including fighters from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon, and Pakistan. The predominantly Sunni armed opposition is made up of a huge array of mostly hardline Islamist groups, many of whom have received financial aid from key opponent countries, including the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. And two groups that have been excluded from the latest ceasefire are Islamic State and the Nusra Front, which changed its name and announced it was cutting its official ties to al-Qaeda. And other armed groups making the situation even worse, complicated, include the Kurdish YPG, which wants autonomy or independence.
It is nearly as long as the Empire State Building is tall, and in 2014 it was the launch deck for the first airstrikes against ISIS. Soon the USS George H.W. Bush will head back out to sea to face the enemy once again. Pentagon producer Lucas Tomlinson recently went on board the ship to see how the crew is preparing for the fight.
On August 8, 2014, a pair of F-18s from USS George H.W. Bush launched the first airstrikes against ISIS in northern Iraq. Now, nearly 2.5 years later, that same aircraft carrier is gearing up for a return to the fight, after being delayed in the shipyard for 6 months, leaving America without an aircraft carrier in the region until early next year. Fox News recently traveled out to Bush, 40 miles off the coast of North Carolina, to see the warship's final tune-up before setting sail early next year.
This is the military equivalent of spring training, because once we complete this at the end of December, then we'll be going forward, and it'll be real forces that will be going flying with and against.
Much has changed since Bush's last deployment to the Persian Gulf in 2014. Russia has deployed dozens of fighter jets and thousands of troops to Syria, joining Syrian and Iranian-backed forces. China has moved hundreds of missiles to the South China Sea. Officials say those missiles were deployed to China's 7 man-made islands in early 2017, putting American aircraft at risk. The ship's commanding officer says his crew will be ready to deal with China or Russia if necessary.
Authorities in major European capitals have beefed up security over fears of terror attacks ahead of New Year's festivities. Thousands of police and military personnel have been deployed to protect the civilians in Paris, Berlin, Brussels, Madrid, and Rome, among other European cities. Fireworks have been called off in certain areas in Berlin where a terrorist rammed a truck into a Christmas market, killing a dozen people on December the 19th. A similar incident claimed the lives of 86 people in the French city of Nice back in July. Elsewhere in New York, counterterrorism police are patrolling Times Square in the lead-up to New Year's celebrations. In Manhattan, the West has been gripped by surge in deadly terror attacks over the past few years.